Hello and welcome to our Brexit webinar series, this time focusing on North America. Thank you so much for everybody that is joining us today. We are conscious that you're giving up your precious time, so we will try and keep today to 45 minutes. I'm going to introduce you to our experts, Angie Fiddler, Adrian Jones, Martin Kenyuk and Mark Byrne. Today we are going to be focusing on Brexit, what the latest updates are. We're going to be looking at why it is important to understand the impact of Brexit on those who are outside the European Union and the UK, and understand the opportunities and options available to aircraft owners and operators. Please do ask questions throughout today. If we can't get to them in the webinar, we will answer your questions afterwards. We will be having polls throughout the webinar, and I've just launched the first of those now. Please do take part in those. As always, we'll be focusing, excuse me, on VAT, so that's value added tax, and customs duties. We won't be talking about aircraft operations, flying rules, cabotage, and we'll try our best not to discuss politics. So let's kick off. There's something going on in the EU and the UK. Mark, what is Brexit?
Well, long story short, Heather, 23rd of June 2016, the UK held a referendum in which 52% of the people that voted to leave, that the UK should leave the European Union. At the time, the UK government wasn't at all sure what that meant or what it looked like. They waited a bit, and then on the 29th of March 2017, they triggered something called Article 50, which meant that the UK would leave after 2 years. That 2-year period was supposed to be about negotiating a trade relationship with the European Union. That's finally coming to a head now. On the 1st of February this year, the UK formally left the European Union. However, it remains within the European Union's custom territory and single market. But all that's going to change on the 31st of December. And that really is what this is all about, those changes.
Thank you, Mark. So let's look at the significance of the 31st of December and the end of the transition period. Martin, can you talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So what it means is there's going to be 2 separate customs and VAT areas, one for the UK, the Isle of Man, and then a separate one for the remaining EU 27 countries. And the impact that's going to have on aviation is that you're going to need to have solutions in place for both of those territories. If you're imported into one, it will mean that in the future you won't automatically be imported into the other. So existing aircraft are going to have a solution that they might need to put in place for the area that they're leaving. And for new aircraft that are arriving next year, owners are going to have to think right from the outset about having a solution in place for both areas, if it's applicable.
Okay, thank you. So, Mark, you mentioned the timings there, and that the UK voted to leave the EU in June 2016. The final exit will happen on the 31st of December. We're on the 23rd of November, which gives us 26 working days. And do we have anywhere close to a decision yet?
Well, there are a couple of things that we can report. Firstly, the US and the UK agreed a bilateral air services agreement. So commercial air transport between the UK and the US will continue as before. Of course, there's no change there between the US and the EU. And just last week, the UK concluded a similar agreement with Canada along the lines, basically, of the agreement that Canada itself had negotiated with the European Union just 2 years ago. If there is a trade agreement at the end of the year, we will know a little bit more about what's possible to do and what's not possible to do. Right now, it seems that an agreement, if there is to be an agreement, has to be concluded this week, because once the agreement has been agreed, it then needs to be ratified by the 27 parliaments within the European Union, plus the European Union's parliament, as well as the UK's. And with only 26 working days to go, you can imagine that's a pretty tall order. So come what may on the 31st of December, stuff will change because the UK will have left the single market and the customs union. Right now, there is still no deal, but we're hopeful. Back to you.
Thank you. So now I think we know where we're up to with Brexit. Let's put this in the context of what we're going to be talking about today. So Adrian, for our audience, can you provide, and I know that this is a tricky one, a 30-second summary on what VAT is and how it is calculated?
Well, VAT is a tax on transactions that are carried out within the EU and within the UK after the separation period. It's also a tax on imports. So as far as our friends are concerned in North America, if an aircraft was flying into Europe, for example, there would be a VAT charge levied on that aircraft on arrival into the EU, unless there's a reason not to import the aircraft or not to apply VAT. We'll be talking about temporary admission in a little while. That's a reason not to import. But the VAT calculation itself is based on the VAT rate in that particular member state of arrival. Now, the VAT rates can vary between member states. There's an official minimum of 15%, but the minimum rate at the moment would be 17%, but the maximum rate in Europe applied is 27%. So there is a range of VAT rates that could be applied. The rates are applied according to various rules that are laid down in the customs code. And principally, you'd look first at whether there'd been a recent transaction. So if there were a recent transaction for that aircraft, a sale purchase prior to import, then you would have a value based on that transaction. In the absence of a transaction, the value would be based technically on what an equivalent equal product might be valued at. So if you didn't have a transaction price, you'd look at the equivalent and work out the value of that, an equivalent aircraft, or a similar aircraft in the absence of that, and so on, to arrive at a value. Now, this normally in practice means that you'd use an approved valuer to provide you with a market valuation, and then that valuation would be multiplied by the VAT rate applicable to get to the VAT that you pay. So for 10 million of aircraft at 20%, that would be 2 million, for example.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Slightly over the 30 seconds, but I think that explained it very well. So what we're going to be talking about today is how this and why it impacts aircraft and operators outside of the EU and the UK. Adrian, can you give an overview of why and how it's going to impact?
Well, this is important for anyone who's imported their aircraft, be they European-based or North American-based. Where the aircraft has been imported, there will be a divide now between the EU and the UK, and you might find that your aircraft remains imported in either the UK or the EU. The choice is looking very binary at the moment. As Mark explained, there is no agreement. Therefore, you have to right now assume that based on a basket of fiscal analysis of your aircraft, the customs status, the VAT status, any establishments in the EU, etc., that the aircraft will either be or remain imported in the UK or the EU, but not both.
Okay, and just to be crystal clear for the audience, what will the two new customs territories look like?
Well, the newly created customs territory will be the UK now. For those that have used Isle of Man services in the past for their aircraft, the Isle of Man remains part of the UK for that customs territory. That's the newly created territory, if you like, that is carved out of the existing EU customs territory. Now, the EU customs territory will continue, but it will continue with 27 countries included in that territory, not 28, so minus the UK.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Adrian. So a question that we have received a lot is regarding aircraft that were imported through the UK into the European Union using the old weight-based regime that ended on the 1st of January 2011. Angie, could you tell the audience whether or not those aircraft will be impacted by Brexit?
Yeah, of course. Well, the answer is yes, they will be. If the aircraft are still being operated, owned by the party that imported them prior to 2011, makes no difference when they were imported. If they're still owned in the same way, still operated in the same way, then the same applies, as Martin mentioned there earlier, the fact that it will need to be imported into the UK and the EU, or it might be able to use temporary admission, but we're going to talk about TA later on. It's really, the thing is also to look at, I do beg your pardon, is that to look at when was the aircraft last in the EU or the UK? Because if that's more than 3 years ago, it will have lost its right to returned goods relief, or RGR. So it's all things to consider what needs to be done from here.
Okay, so we know that we can't get away from Brexit actually happening and the UK leaving the EU. We know that aircraft travelling into or within the UK and or the new EU 27 are going to be impacted. So how do you get prepared for analysing whether your aircraft is going to have an issue and whether or not you need to take action? Adrian, can I ask you that question?
Well, I think right now we are still within the one single customs territory. So talk about re-importations and so forth are not appropriate right now. However, what can be done is a review of the documentation that you have on hand to understand the fiscal status of the aircraft. As I mentioned before, it might be a basket of facts to do with the customs status of the aircraft, the VAT status of the aircraft. You might have various documents that will be mentioned in a while. And you need to analyze, I think, where the center, the fiscal center of the aircraft is, whether that's more UK based or EU based, and whether that actually fits with the planned operation of the aircraft, where the user wants to take the aircraft, where the user is based, etc. And think about those things now and plan for what you might need to do at the end of this year.
Thank you. So we know from our experience in working in aviation that generally when owners or operators are looking at this type of problem, they're not doing it with a single person. Martin, what type of team would you expect to be involved in looking for this? And do they need any specialist knowledge?
Yeah, so Hollywood said Avengers assemble, we'd say advisors assemble, which basically means that you need to get hold of the team that originally were involved in your transaction. So when a client originally imported their aircraft, they would have dealt with the VAT in a certain way, they would have imported into a certain country. And what you really need to do is to get those people together to find out, well, what is it that you did? What paperwork was generated at the time? What was the scenario? And you need to start asking yourself, well, has the scenario changed since we did that? Because now different solutions might need to be put in place for a different area, a different way of using the aircraft, etc., etc.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another question on this, but before I do, just to remind our audience, I'm going to close the first poll very shortly, so please do vote on that if you haven't already. So, Martin, you've mentioned documents there. Are there any specific documents that aircraft owners or operators should be looking for?
Yeah, so really when an aircraft is imported into the EU, there's a document that's generated, and people will know it by different names, but it does the same thing. It's a European document. There's the SAD, the Single Administrative Document, or the C88. It might be kept on board the aircraft. It might be kept in lawyer's office, but it is a document that's got a series of boxes with numbers, with codes, with addresses in it. To the average person looking at it, it doesn't mean an awful lot, but to either a tax advisor or a customs officer, it's going to mean an awful lot about the way that the aircraft has been imported, who's imported it, how VAT is being accounted for, etc. So if you can find that, lay your hands on that, that's really important.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. So I'm going to end the polling now and share those results with you. And it looks like the audience know that their clients are flying into the EU, UK, and that they need to take action. So that's a fantastic result for us to have. So moving on, now we know the aircraft and operators flying into or within the EU are going to have an issue. They're going to get prepared, they're going to get their teams together. So let's start looking at the options that will be available to aircraft owners and operators. Mark, I'm going to ask you to give us an overview on this. And while I do that, I'm going to share my screen with the audience for here's one we made earlier, chart of what we think the options will be.
Okay, Heather. So the options are as follows. You could pay the VAT, of course. That could be quite an expensive option, and most people would prefer not to pay the VAT if they could possibly avoid it. Mention has already been made of temporary admission, and for those aircraft that meet the criteria, temporary admission is a very useful device for the occasional visitor, but you do need to follow the rules and be quite careful about understanding them. The next solution, and this would be ideal, I think, for a corporate aircraft that's owned by a business, would be a full importation into either the UK or to the European Union. We have our Netherlands Navigator, for example, which might be useful for those wanting to import into the European Union because they'd already been imported through the UK. And lastly, and probably more rarely, you might need to get yourself a new corporate ownership structure for the aircraft, which will allow for a VAT registration and for an importation to be taken place and either the VAT accounted for and reclaimed or the VAT accounted for and deferred. So those are the basic options. Back to you, Heather.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, if anybody would like a copy of that chart, please do email me and I will make it available to you. So let's look at the first one of those key options, which is temporary admission. Adrian, can you explain what temporary admission is?
Yes, certainly. When aircraft arrive into the EU, normally they should be imported and any VAT paid, they should be declared to customs and so on, unless there's a reason not to. And one of the main reasons not to have to declare an import is to enter under temporary admission. Temporary admission grants full customs relief from import and from paying VAT. It's a very simple and effective way of entering the EU. There's no formal requirements other than you meet the rules of temporary admission, and provided that you have, say, a non-EU registration, a non-EU legal owner in whose name the aircraft is registered, and the user of the aircraft is not EU established or resident, then it is a very cheap and effective way of coming to the EU for non-routine visits, I would suggest.
And can you sum up who temporary admission is aimed at?
Temporary admission is aimed at the private user, the non-charter user who doesn't live in the EU and is looking to visit for short periods of time. There is a maximum of 6 months per any period of stay, which is, it's unlikely that because of the frequency of movement of aircraft that would be reached, but it's designed for non-EU residents who want to come visit, not for, I guess, more corporates who will fly in every week or several times a month.
Okay, thank you. And can you give us an overview of the pros and cons of temporary admission?
Well, the pros are that you don't need any changes to any of your setup or ownership arrangements. If you meet the test for temporary admission, you simply arrive, you enter, you can secure some paperwork if you're traveling point to point between a number of EU countries. That might be useful, but actually there's no paperwork required, and it's just a very easy way of entering the EU. Now, the cons. I have to disclose at this point, I was a customs officer. Hard to believe, I know, but if I were looking at 2 aircraft and I was looking to inspect, then I think I'd choose the aircraft that was under temporary admission, because an imported aircraft would have no further VAT to pay. However, a temporarily admitted aircraft could break the rules, might break the rules, and there could be therefore an assessment of 20% to 23, 25%, depending on the country, that customs officer could apply to the aircraft for failure to respect the rules. So the cons are you have to get advice on how those rules apply, because you don't want to go near those red lines and break those rules.
Thank you, Adrian. So let's move away from temporary admission and look at full importation. And let's start by looking at corporate solutions that are available for full importation. They're widely available in Malta, Cyprus, Ireland, the Isle of Man. Martin, could you explain why somebody might want to use a corporate vehicle to import their aircraft, and who that type of person is going to be?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, they're a fantastic option. They're a very well-worn path. People have used them for any number of years, and they're in places, like you said, Malta, Isle of Man, Ireland, places that are known and understand about business aircraft, but also about tax as well, because both are really complicated, and you put the 2 of them together and it makes it even more complicated. So they're really useful for people, organizations that have maybe their headquarters is outside of the EU, but they have business operations within the EU, and the aircraft is actually going to live in the EU or the UK, of course. The aircraft might be registered not on the November register, and it might be on an EU registration, so something that's kind of closely attached to Europe.
And how does it work in practice?
So the company that you would form to own an aircraft is going to make that aircraft available to the rest of the companies in the group for money. So maybe a dry lease, something like that. It's going to raise invoices, it's going to receive money, it's going to actively trade, it's going to genuinely be a trading company that, if you like, leases out its aircraft for its business. And what that does is it enables the company to register for VAT. And with a VAT registration, what you can do is you can reclaim any VAT that you're charged. And that includes the VAT that you're charged when you import your aircraft. And like Mark said earlier, different countries have different ways of dealing with the VAT. The most common is that you would pay and then reclaim the VAT, but that's got an issue if you're looking for cash flow efficiency. So some countries do allow you to defer the VAT, and what that enables you to do is you defer the VAT until a point in the future. And before that point in the future actually arrives, you then apply to reclaim the VAT, as you would do through the normal reclaim process. So actually what they'll allow you to do is to try and reclaim the VAT before you have to pay it. So you end up not having to pay over that substantial sum, which is great for tax flow efficiency.
Great, and that kind of leads me into my next question, which is the same as TA. What are the pros and cons of having a corporate vehicle solution?
Okay, so I suppose it's not really a con, but what you've got to bear in mind is that if you establish a company, it's a real company that's linked to a tax jurisdiction. And as well as the benefits of that, you also have the obligations. So you genuinely have to run that company. You just can't have it import the aircraft and then forget about it. You have to actively, properly, genuinely operate that company. It's an ongoing commitment in that jurisdiction. I suppose the biggest pro, as well as getting the importation VAT back, is that any other bills that you receive that have got VAT, so maintenance, hangarage, etc., that you're going to be receiving, you can also reclaim the VAT on those as well. So it's quite neat, but it is a proper commitment.
Thank you very much, Martin. So moving on to the other full importation solution, the Netherlands Navigator. Angie, would you give us a description of that?
Yeah, of course, I'd be pleased to. So Netherlands Navigator, it's a one-off solution for importing an aircraft. It's by using a licensed fiscal representative who acts on your behalf, you can import the aircraft, gain EU free circulation. With respect to the VAT and accounting for the VAT, you're not having to pay and reclaim. It's actually the licensed fiscal representative who's accounting for the VAT on your behalf against their VAT return. And a little bit, as Martin explained there a few moments ago, there is a mechanism whereby you can actually reclaim the VAT before it's due to be paid out. So this, in the instance of the Netherlands, this is by means of a deferment account that's held again by us as a licensed representative. It's ideal for operators, be they commercial or corporate, that don't need a European solution in place themselves. By engaging a fiscal representative, you are as I said, they're acting on your behalf. You're not registering for VAT purposes. You're not being able to reclaim any VAT on any other service or supply that's made to you. But on the plus side, there's absolutely no need to make any changes whatsoever to your current structure or operation. So you're not having to put another layer in, whereby you might be if you're looking to put in a corporate structure. With respect to how it's dealt with, it's a one-off process, as I say, and really a very quick and simple solution. And looking at the attendees that we've got signed up for here today, a number of our clients have used this already.
Thank you, Angie. So to play devil's advocate then, because the Netherlands Navigator sounds so simple and easy, why might you prefer a corporate solution rather than a Netherlands Navigator?
It comes back down to what's needed for you in your own operation. So as we said at the beginning, review your own operation. What is it you require? How are you working? Where do you need to be, etc. So a corporate solution might be absolutely the right answer for you because you have a lot of costs, etc., or bases within Europe, and therefore you would be incurring taxes, VAT rather, that you can reclaim if you have a corporate solution in place. But if you're not, and you're only needing to deal with the VAT to get into the EU for free circulation, it's possibly the right answer for you. But it's no one size fits all. I know we say this every time, but no one size fits all. You have to look at individual operation specific to you. Don't look at what your friend down the road with a similar aircraft's doing. You've got to look at your own operation, get the right decision to get the optimal decision and solution rather for yourself.
Perfect. So I'm going to ask a quick question from our audience, which is, why would I bother with a full importation when temporary admission is free and easy? Adrian, can I get you to talk about that?
There are some red lines which are difficult to navigate, if you like, for temporary admission, which would move you towards full importation. The choice typically is binary, but if you can't meet the test for temporary admission, then yes, full importation. If you're carrying EU passengers within the EU, for example, they could be seen as the users, depending on circumstance, and you'd want to import the aircraft in order not to break that rule for temporary admission. In fact, because of what I mentioned earlier about customs officers from time to time choosing to ramp check the temporarily admitted aircraft, some of our clients, where there is the option to import, for the price of where there is an option to import, for the price of that import, it makes sense then to import rather than rely on temporary admission where the rules could be broken.
Okay, and sticking with you, Adrian, so we've looked at the options for aircraft flying into or within the EU. Is there an option where an aircraft is being sold and the transaction is going to close in either the new EU27 or the UK?
Well, we've been looking at the upside, if you like, for the Brexit separation, the removal of the UK from the EU VAT territory. So the UK is not just coming out of the customs territory, but also the VAT territory. And one of the things that brokers and lawyers often look to achieve is to close in a non-VAT territory. So they know that the seller won't have a problem in charging VAT and the buyer won't have a problem in picking up that VAT if it is charged. So quite often aircraft will say go to the Channel Islands where there's just no VAT applicable. Sadly, there aren't that many facilities in the Channel Islands either. So the worry is sometimes that if an aircraft goes technical on the ground in the Channel Islands, there isn't the support there to be had. With the advent of the UK departing EU VAT territory, then there's the option for closings to take place, presumably in the UK, outside of EU VAT territory. But what about UK VAT? Well, there is a network of customs warehouses that we operate within the UK, and they allow aircraft to enter the UK without having to declare an import for customs purposes and pay VAT at import. And indeed, if you close inside customs warehouse in the UK, there's no VAT applicable either on that closing. So what Brexit has done is has opened the door to the possibility that instead of going to Jersey or Guernsey, aircraft can now arrive into the UK, go through the customs warehousing process. This is a formal customs authorization that needs to be done. But once that's done, the aircraft can arrive at almost any aircraft that you would think is associated with business aircraft, be it Farnborough or Biggin Hill, Stansted, other airports as well. And then closing can take place in the UK without further VAT consequences. So an example of one of the upsides, at least from Brexit.
Thank you very much, Adrian. So there's a bit of a test for our audience. I'm going to launch our second poll. That is going live now. So please do participate and vote in that. So we've got our team assembled. We know what we're looking for. We know what options are now available. So to touch on something that Angie mentioned earlier and trying to find the optimal solution. Martin, how do you start trying to narrow down the options available and find that optimal solution?
That's actually really easy. You get a team together of professionals and you ask them to narrow down your options. It's quite complicated. What you've got to do is not only marry the regulations and the rules, but you've got to marry that with actually what you do with your aircraft, where it's based, all of that kind of information. And that's not easy. And just like with everything else associated with a client's business aircraft, you wouldn't necessarily try and do it yourself. You would engage a team of professionals. So this is exactly the same, is that you need to go through the process of working out what is possible and what gives you the best result in the most simplistic way. You don't want to go for something that's incredibly complex if you don't have to.
Thank you, Martin. Now, the next question I'm going to ask, I'm not going to point at our resident tax advisor because I feel that his answer might be biased. So, Mark, a lot of the stuff that we've spoken about today can be really quite complicated. Do you need a tax advisor? Do you actually need to engage a tax advisor to look at this stuff, or is it more of a nice to have?
Well, of course, aircraft are very valuable assets, and just from their sheer value, the tax that might arise if you got your options wrong could be a very, very expensive mistake indeed. So I don't think tax advice is a nice thing to have. I think it's absolutely essential that if you're the aircraft owner, you don't want to find yourself suddenly landed with a great big tax bill that might easily have been avoided if only the right advice had been sought at the right time. So I think engagement with a tax advisor is essential. I mean, I wouldn't ask my pilot to examine a law contract, and I wouldn't ask my lawyer to land a plane. I think it's unfair to expect these people to understand everything there is to know about tax and the aircraft. So you need to engage a tax professional with professional indemnity insurance in case something does go wrong.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now we're getting questions coming in thick and fast at the moment. So to go to the first one, Adrian, I'm sorry, I'm coming back to you on this one. The question is, are some forms of temporary admission more secure than others?
Interesting question. Temporary admission is defined in the law, in the customs code, and it doesn't mention there that there's any more secure forms or not. That temporary admission is just temporary admission. If you meet the rules, then temporary admission applies, you arrive, you benefit from temporary admission. How that can be any more secure or not, I don't know. I think if I were a customs officer and I found that there were a problem and the rules had been broken, then that's a 20% VAT charge in the UK or more in other member states right there. I don't think there's any secure form of temporary admission that would save you. Okay,
the temporary admission is a hot topic today. So a follow-up question to that just received. What about if what if you have paid a premium for temporary admission?
In law, again, there's no requirement to pay anything for temporary admission. It's a very easy and simple and free form of entry for aircraft that qualify into the EU. I don't think there's any need to pay a premium particularly for, no, not at all. No.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian. Another question that's come in is, do I need to worry because I've got an NREG? Does an NREG have anything to do with it? Angie, can you talk about that?
Yeah, to an extent I can. No, the registration mark doesn't bear any relation to anything. If you're operating in the EU or if you need to be imported into the EU, yeah, doesn't matter what the tail number is effectively. We've, over the years, and in fact, even this week, we've dealt with November registered aircraft that are based in the UK and they have to be imported. So it's the same again. It's it just has to be done. So tail number does not come into it.
Thank you, Angie. Another question and some myth busting here. Does it matter where my aircraft will be on the 31st of December? Martin, I know that this is a pet subject for you, so perhaps you can answer.
Yeah, thanks. So I suppose if you imagine that it gets to the 31st of December, aircraft could be all over the world. And that's just the same now as it's true then. And I think Angie mentioned it earlier, is that aircraft that leave their own fiscal territory, if you want, they come back and they don't need to be re-imported because they take advantage of RGR, return goods relief. So that would still be applicable for, if you like, for UK-based aircraft that have got their fiscal centre as the UK. They can go, they can come back, rely on RGR, and the same for aircraft whose fiscal base is in the EU. They can go and come back. So it's not something to be overly worried about. However, the thing to be really cautious about, which we have heard, is some people saying, well, actually, if you're inside a territory, come the 31st of December, then you'll be classified as being imported in that territory, even though your fiscal centre is with the other one. You've got to be really cautious about that. From what we understand, there will be a kind of an allowance if you are in the other territory come the 31st of December. There will be, if you like, a temporary allowance that means that you won't automatically be asked questions, that you can have time to remove yourself from that area. But what you want to be really cautious about is assuming that because you were there on that night, you have somehow obtained full importation status into that territory. If you're there, you leave on the 2nd of January, you go out and then you try and get back in again, that's when you're going to get ramp checked. So be really, really cautious about relying on something that somebody has told you that's kind of not, well, if it's not written down and it's not paid for and it doesn't come from a tax advisor, it's not tax advice. So be very cautious.
Thank you very much, Martin. Another question, Mark, for you this time. Do I have to deal with it now, or can I wait until January next year?
Well, you don't have any choice over that, Heather. Whilst the UK remains in the customs territory and the VAT territory of the European Union, there is nothing right now that you have to solve. So it's going to have to all be next year. But that doesn't mean, of course, that you can't start planning now by getting your paperwork out and assembling your advisors.
Perfect, thank you. We've got time for one last question. So I'm going to choose the one that's cropped up the most. And Adrian, grandfathering, is it going to happen? Is it likely? And will it resolve everybody's problems?
The short answer is no. It's not likely to happen. And even if it does, it may not solve everybody's problems. Grandfathering is where an aircraft that is imported, say, in the UK, has its fiscal base in the UK, will then be considered as imported still in the EU in the future after the separation. Or the other way around, an aircraft that's in the EU will be considered as equally imported in the UK. The trouble is, this requires an agreement between the EU and the UK governments to allow that to happen. Now, I know that if they get to discuss everything, and if there is an agreement on everything, then aircraft will get some special consideration. But if you unpack that, then you have, if there's an agreement, it's not looking likely at the moment. If they've had time to agree everything and not just been spending their time discussing UK fishing rights, that's another big if. And the last point is the assumption that any kind of grandfathering granted will be complete and absolute and last forever and a day. Well, no, the grandfathering might allow a temporary reprise, a moratorium for a time period. We just don't know what form that might take. So I think right now, on the grandfathering point, we should, yes, hope for the best, but actually prepare for the worst. As I said earlier, look at the paperwork now, think about fiscal base of the aircraft, and prepare the team, as Martin said, to look at what should happen and how it can be implemented come the new year.
Thank you, Adrian. So just quickly to our audience, I'm going to shut the poll very shortly. So please do vote on that now if you haven't already. For everybody that's asked questions, and there have been a lot coming in, if we haven't answered your questions now, we will email you afterwards. And anybody who has a question that they would like to ask us after this webinar, please do feel free to contact us. Also, to let you know that all of our previous webinars, as this one, will be available on our website. The first 3 are there now. This one will be available shortly. So I'm going to close that poll now. I'm going to share the results with you. And it is quite gratifying that people will be calling Martin Fiddler Aviation and the majorities to sort out any issues, but also that people do know the difference in the options and what is going to be good for them. So, to summarise what we've learned today, Brexit is an issue, it can be resolved, and you do need to think about it for any aircraft that are travelling into or within the EU or UK. It's not just an EU and UK problem. There are opportunities that Brexit provides, and you need to check the documents that were provided with the airport, get your team together and understand your options. So I'm hoping that you have learned something today. We are so thankful that you have joined us. Please do carry on asking us questions. Thank you so much for attending. Keep well, stay safe, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.